friend and colleague, Annalisa Raymer from Cornell University in New York State. And Annalisa has been a friend of UConn and a friend of many of us in our adult education and lifelong learning activities. She's involved in learning cities and has been a key mover in the North American Alliance of Learning Cities, and is somebody who always has something interesting to say, and I'm sure will have interesting things to say today. I really like the title of her presentation, Self-Directed Learning with Friends. And I hope we're all friends. But to me, it also resonates with the idea that we learn everywhere, and we probably learn more with our friends than we do anywhere else, because we're having fun and we're learning together. That might be a completely different train of thought that Annalisa is going to take, but nonetheless, I am fascinated by it. So Annalisa, I've taken enough of your time, so I'll pass on to you, and thank you for doing this first thing in the morning, first activity of the day in New York State. And it's nice to welcome you to the UConn Open Forum.
Well, thank you very much, Seamus. And if I wasn't such a night owl, it wouldn't be first thing in the morning, but I am a bona fide night owl. So I'm going to thank you all for coming, and I look forward. I'm kind of glad we're a little small group today, because maybe we can have some more conversation. And I'm going to share my screen, but once I do that, I won't be able to actually see the chat because I'm using PDF in full screen mode. So if you don't mind, would you just put into the chat now before I start my slides, if you use self-directed learning either as for yourself or in your teaching, and if you have experience with communities of practice. So could you just pop that into the chat now, and let me take a minute to see. That just gives me an idea of, these aren't new ideas, but we might not all be on the same page. Okay, great. Thank you, Susan. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, yes. Okay, great. All righty. Okay. We have a range. That's perfect. All right, now I'm going to share my screen. And good morning. Can everybody hear me now that I can't see you? Somebody say yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Susan. All righty. So self-directed learning with friends. And this is me, and this is my favorite picture of myself I did with that Google image thing of AI. As Nicholas said yesterday, he had a life before he started being a scientist, and I had a life before I went back to school and got my doctorate. I was a community organizer and a librarian and a non-formal educator. And then once I got my doctorate, I've taught at 3 different places before I came to Cornell. So that's enough about me. What I want to talk about today are 4 C's. I want to just tell you what the claim is that I'm making, tell you the context that I work in, give you a case example, and then hear from comments from some of the learners. So this kind of lays out what my capture of the current moment is, that we are, all of us, regardless of what our world of work is, in training for a marathon, and that it requires us to up our knowledge base and our toolboxes and our mindsets and build up our resilience muscles, because we're in this unprecedented challenge in human history to get to an inclusive and just sustainability. And when I think about this, I think of it as part race, part design challenge. I like that part. That's more exciting than a race to me. Part performance test, but that we're all needed to be part of this effort. And that I mean, having teammates to train with whenever we're going for something athletic is helpful. It nudges us to keep going as we are learning with one another and from one another. So it's kind of where I'm coming from. So my claim is that self-directed learning plus communities of practice are just two apt teaching strategies for this moment of transition and transformation that we need to be about. So what is it that we actually need? If we think in terms of like backcasting and we look to the future and what is that climate stable, healthy, inclusive and just sense of the world and the physical planet on which we rely, then if we think backwards, well, what is it that people need to be able to do and to get to that future? And I think a lot of it has to do with the soft skills, because some of us, there's so many places one could work on climate change and sustainability. And when I think about what is my handle, what is my entry point, it is not the technical stuff. It is, I'm so glad that other people do have a handle on things like how to decarbonize and things like that. I'm so glad about that. That is not where I find myself. And I think it requires all of us to do a bit of discernment about where can I be effective and positive. And at least for now, my sense of where I can make a contribution is in teaching, and in particularly in cultivating the practices that allow us to work together. Frances Moore LePay, most famous for Diet for Small Planet, but she's done a lot of things since then. But she used to talk about the arts of democracy, or the democratic arts. And it was the things about how we, one, have to be equipped ourselves, but two, how we do work with other people. And I'm kind of putting words in her mouth because I use it a little bit differently than she did, but she would talk about things like, how do you collaborate? How do you overcome conflict or work with conflict? How do you evaluate? How do you facilitate? That kind of thing. So I think that that is kind of the playground that I can make a contribution in. And one of my heroes is the late Donella Meadows, who was one of the original people that did the Club of Rome report on the limits to growth and figured out how to model carrying capacity of the earth. And Donella Meadows did a lot of very influential work while she was doing all these other things. There's the limits to growth down there at the bottom. And then thinking in systems. She was a systems modeler with Jay Forrester. And one of the pieces that really influenced me was her leverage points. She was at a tariffs and trade talk, and it just struck her that talking about bushels and pounds and things like that was not really going to change a system. And she came up with, and you may be familiar with this, these 12 leverage points of places to intervene in a system. And her original listing of this started with the least effective at the top and then went down to the most impactful, sorry, I hate that word, leverage points. And these are just the bottom 6 here, but you can see that the lever of greatest impact is the power to transcend paradigms, to transcend the assumptions and the worldview that got us into the current situation that we're in anyway. So if we think about the soft skills plus these sort of structural things, the power to add, change, evolve, and self-organize, the power to change the goals of the system, and the goals to change the mindset. I think that those kind of soft skills plus these kinds of ways of thinking about how do we order ourselves and our society, I think those are very powerful places to work if we think about how do we want to equip ourselves and help our learners be equipped to be active and constructive problem solvers and innovators in our current moment. Now, at the time of her death, she and two of the original co-authors of Limits to Growth were working on a 30-year update, and she had written a lot of her contributions before she passed. And part of what she did is she said that she had wanted to put the softer stuff in the original Limits to Growth, but she just thought, oh, we'll get laughed out of, that's just not academic enough, but that she regretted not having done that. And these were the things that she didn't put in while she was doing all her very systematic computer modeling of the Earth's carrying capacity. She wanted to put in that these 5 tools are not optional. They are not sufficient, but we have to have these abilities and capacities if we are going to survive in the long term. So visioning, networking, truth-telling, learning, and loving. Yeah. So the context, so that's kind of what I'm about. And the context, where am I doing this? It looks like this right now, by the way. It's beautiful right now. The curriculum in adult and lifelong learning and an educational mentoring program. So while the adult learning curriculum is cited within Faculty of Global Development, our courses actually draw from all 7 colleges and schools that make up Cornell, at least the Ithaca campus. And we get undergrads and we get grads and we get staff and faculty actually in our courses because as we know, the principles and practices of adult learning are so universally applicable in so many aspects of our life. So we get people coming, not just students, but coming to find out, okay, how do I organize my meetings? How do I think about my colleagues in a co-developmental kind of way? So we don't have an education department here, and our adult learning curriculum consists of 4 courses, and they don't count toward anybody's degree, but they do change people's lives, if I may humbly say so. They actually do. So all of them have university designation as community engaged learning, and you'll see why in just a second. And one has university designation as a sustainability course. They're all very actively taught. Most of them are studios because we are inventing and trying out designs for learning in class and using our classes as living laboratories or seminars. And most are 4-credit classes and one is a 3-credit class. So that's the context in that we're teaching. And our classes do draw adult learners, as even though they are enrolled students, because we have a big military program here. And right now I've got 4 people who are older students because they've done military service and then have come back to school. But we also have adult learners in that I mentioned an accompanying program is a work-based learning program. So all of the students that are taking our classes are paired with a service employee on our campus who wants to pursue an educational goal of their own. So the students serve as an educational mentor, kind of a reverse mentoring thing, because the student is usually paired with an older person, and yet they're charged that this is a mutual learning opportunity, that they are not a teacher and they're not a tutor. They are a coach to support and mentor for someone else to be successful in reaching their goals. So when it began, CLASP was seen as focused on literacy. Students in particular were looking around and going, why do we have these inequality of opportunities in this college-rich town? And literacy was seen as one of the things that held people back. And students wanted to tackle that. And a student who had been working as a janitor and saw that the folks at that time in the service industries at Cornell were not getting a good deal, let's just say. He then went on to become the chapter president of unionizing the service workers at Cornell. So it was students and union workers that got this together. Now, the population that work in dining and custodial services and hospitality has changed, and literacy is no longer what people ask for. Now it's because a lot of the service employees are first or second generation immigrants. English language acquisition is the biggest thing that's asked for, followed by computer skills. But then people can ask for anything. Some people want to learn how to edit video, or some people want to learn how to do halal cooking, so just anything, we try to match them. So here's how it works. You get one student and you get one adult learner who is an employee at Cornell in this service industries. And the intent is for them to learn from each other. And the students do these debriefs every week. So after they've met with their partner, they talk about, like what went well from a teaching and relationship building perspective, what they want to try differently, and what they learned from their partners. Now, when we first started, employees got 3 hours a week on the clock to study with a student, but now we don't get that much, and it's up to the supervisors of the employees to decide if it's on the clock or not. So things have changed. It's a very photogenic program. When you have students and older workers smiling at each other because they're both co-learners and they both had a great time, you just see that joy of, like Seamus was saying earlier, of learning everywhere and learning with everyone that we come in contact with. The program, despite being kind of fringy here, has won lots of awards, and the most recent one being this prize for interracial and intercultural peace and harmony. So those earlier pictures I showed you when I said it was so photogenic, those were pre-COVID. So this is what it looks like this semester. So you're either on Zoom, as the pair at the bottom are, or you're outside. Now, technically, they don't have to wear a mask outside, but they're sitting so close that they're choosing to do that anyway, or inside with your mask on. I'm only able to be without my mask here, of course, because I've got my door shut. All right, so that's the context that I'm working in. And I'm going to just pause here since I can't see any faces, and invite anybody who wants to say anything or ask a question before I go on. Just speak up, please.
Thank you so far anyway, Annalisa. This has been a really interesting journey. So anybody like to ask anything, say anything?
No pressure. Actually, I wanted to drink a water, but I'm also weirded out by not being able to see you.
Of course, for me at least, seeing the beautiful campus and the foliage brings back very, very happy memories of a few visits to Cornell myself in the past. So I'm loving the pictures as much as anything else.
Okay, well, excellent. Listen,
we have a hand up from Christina.
Yeah, thank you for this excellent presentation. Annalisa, you said that they wouldn't get any credits for their studies, right? I mean, you said they have some credits, but within their own other studies, they wouldn't get it, right? Or how do I understand that?
So because there is no education degree offered at Cornell, it's not like the classes they take with us in adult and lifelong learning study count toward their degree. So they're not required classes for anyone's degree is what I mean. They do count as electives in lots of minors and in some degree programs. It's not like they're wasted, but because I guess what I'm getting at is that to keep a presence and to keep adult and lifelong learning a real thing here requires some intentionality and some outreach and some relationship building, because there's no actual reason for students to encounter these courses because they're not required for any degree. They do get credit for them. It does count toward their graduation credits, and it does fulfill some requirements for electives, but they could elect to take something else. So all I'm saying is, despite it being a little precarious here, yet we persist.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the case course, and this is where we get to the self-directed learning projects and communities of practice. So for example, Intro to Adult Learning, this is a course where we have both of those things going on. It was too wordy to put all the learning outcomes up here, but you can kind of get a sense of what we're at in this little diagram. So there's 4 main teaching strategies going on or 4 teaching approaches going on in this course. And the first one is that it is a participatory studio, and it's to whatever extent that it is workable, it's democratically run. So for example, when students said, hey, this attendance policy doesn't work, where I said, okay, you get 1 golden ticket for an absence, no questions asked, but after that, you get some points off your final score, because we only meet once a week, and yeah, you just can't miss these 3 and 4 hour studios, or you miss a lot, right? And they said, this doesn't work. If we're in COVID, if we're in quarantine, you can't penalize us for being in quarantine. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I hear that. All right, what do you propose instead? So then they all had to went and broke into groups and took it on as a design project to, okay, here's the issue, what the attributes of the solution need to include, and they came up with a different and quite acceptable attendance policy now. So that's what I mean about it being democratically run. Another way is that I always, I know who's in the class, although now I'm just going to do it on who am pre-enrolled in it, because if I wait until see who actually shows up when the start of the semester, it's kind of rushed. So I do an interview and or a survey with everybody taking the class, just so I can find out what their real interests are and what they can contribute to the class so that I can tweak it. But anyway, so that's the participatory part. Then there's the learning partnership. That's the mentoring of the adult learner and developing that relationship and doing those debriefs every week, as well as preparing lessons. And then there's a self-directed learning project. And why do I have them do this? I have them do this because when I think about how do I hope that these courses are working on people, or how have they internalized them 5 or 10 years down the road, I hope that they identify as lifelong learners themselves. So that's why I have them do a self-directed learning project, so that they, when they come to our classes, they don't even really think about learning and education in a broad sense. They equate it with schooling, and they equate it with, okay, tell me what's going to be on the test, that kind of thing. So if I tell them you have a self-directed learning project, and it can really be about anything, that's quite a jiggle to them. Then the fourth kind of thing going on in this class is the self-directed learning, SDL, with friends, putting them into communities of practice. So most of us are familiar with what self-directed learning is. It's when people take the initiative, they sort of author their own learning program. And it doesn't mean, of course, that you have to do it by yourself. You can definitely get support and resources and draw on other people for assistance along the way. But you figure out what your learning need or learning desire is, and you sort of formulate how you're going to know when you've met your learning goals, and you implement your own program. And it's great. I mean, it just gets, I see it helping students realize, oh, I'm not a receptacle sitting here under Furry's bank model, where the info is just going in the top of my head. I am steering my ship. So I'm a big believer in self-directed learning, but it can seem like one more thing for students who are already quite stressed out by everything that's going on. And Cornell is known to be Cornell students are stressed. And then, as I was telling Seamus beforehand, now that we've had some bomb scares, they were hoaxes, that's good. And then an armed person run around campus. So it's just really stressful. So how to combat that? And that's why I started thinking about communities of practice as doing self-directed learning with friends. Now, I'm not going to take the time to show you this little 4-minute clip of Etienne Wingner talking about communities of practice, but I will, once I'm out of full screen, I will put that into the chat so you can see it yourself. But I do like the way that he talks about it being a group of people whose practice issues that they bring to each other and work out with each other becomes the living curriculum for that group. So what, as you know, what characterizes a community of practice, that they are groups of people who share a passion for something that they do and who interact regularly to learn how to do about it. So the domain is the shared interest or concern. The community is that, just exactly what it sounds like, supporting one another. And in our case, it's supporting one another's self-directed learning work. And then in the practice to accumulate experience and build knowledge, and to do so, not just shooting the breeze all the time, but to insert some purposeful activities that really bring out and precipitate that, cultivate that capture of insight. So I told the students about and a community of practice that I'm in, that it took me a while to recognize was a community of practice, but it is. So it's an international group of community builders and people with interest in learning cities or learning localities. And what this group has in common, what the domain is that everyone in their group is interested in kind of the role and contributions of faith and spirituality for humane and just post-pandemic recovery. But the group actually started before the pandemic, so it's more like, how do we build a humane community? So as a community of practice, we meet online monthly. We take turns leading those sorts of structured activities that prompt co-learning together and reflection. We are doing some action research together. We see each other in person as opportunities arise, and we produce things out of our reflections and out of our activities. So as I shared with the students, how we do this is that we keep running notes while we're meeting. Somebody is doing live notes. We do active social journaling, meaning that we annotate on each other's reflections and each other's contributions. So we have running notes, we have a journal that we are socially annotating, and that we archive or collect the designs for all the structures of the designs that we do, of the exercises that we do together, some of which we invent and some of which we bring to the group from other places. So I just gave them that example so that they could start to picture what this means. And here's what I asked of them. I asked them to draft a format for their meetings, a pattern that they wanted to follow, just because they don't have a lot of time. You know, by the time you get the learning partnerships going, by the time they know enough about what adult learning is to be able to be helpful to an adult learner, that's a lot. So I don't introduce this until about midway. So that only leaves like 6 weeks left. So this is a short-term kind of pilot community of practice. So I asked them to figure out what the design is for their meetings. Just, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but just what's the pattern? Do you want to do check-ins at the start? How do you want to do it? Decide if you're taking turns facilitating or you're using another mode for leading the group. How is that going to happen? And then consider simple avenues or platforms for sharing resources and ideas. So some of them use Slack, some of them make a folder in a Google Drive, or they figure out what works for them. And then as I asked them for their individual self-directed learning project, what is kind of the question that you're giving yourself that you want to pursue? I then asked them in their community of practice, what is kind of the bigger question that serves as an umbrella for all of your self-directed learning projects can contribute toward? And then I asked them to just discuss whether or not they want to have group norms. Like some people feel like that's really important and other people feel like that's kind of artificial. So anyway, that's what they're given to start with. And then what does that do for them? So in this current semester, we've got, because they they don't believe me that really this can be about anything. And I said, yes, definitely it can be about anything. And if you are a very stressed out student, it can be about saying no to things. It can really be about anything, because they're thinking, wait a minute, is there some like secret thing that it has to be about that she's not telling us? Or does it have to be about our class? Or does it have to be about academics in general or specifically? And no, it really can be about anything. So this semester we have a community practice that's around arts and crafts, including music. We have one that's around self-development toward something. Like one person wants to be a rugby coach, one person wants to be a better teacher, one person wants to be a stand-up comedian. So those people that are like trying to grow into a particular identity or role, they're a group. And then we have a plant identification group. They want to pay attention to the world around them and know what the plants are. So we have, and then we have a physical fitness and wellness group. So those are the way the projects kind of shook out this semester. So then yesterday, and like I said, it's been a really stressful week for students here. I just asked them the question here: if your community of practice, and then that funny, the community practice is COP the same week that the COP is meeting in Glasgow. Anyway, if your community of practice has influenced your self-directed learning, how so? And I'm just going to share 2 slides worth of this. So one said, I learned a lot about who he was as a teacher, as a leader, and as well as figuring out where he needed to grow. And I just love that. I think that that's so wonderful when you can figure out, okay, this is my growing edge. And he's feeling more confident. And then another one said that he began with this sort of general idea that he wanted to somehow be a better student advisor and a leader. But what does that mean? And that being in a community of practice helped him figure out how to frame that and how to make an actual project that he could feel good about. And then another one said that that she just likes being able to have a way to stay on track, that just hearing about other people making progress helps her make progress and being able to share. As you can see, this one talked about just the frustration of getting things off the ground. You know how that is when you've got that blank page or that whatever, and then you've got to get started. Just having other people around who are also getting started on whatever it is that they're doing is really helpful. And I like the way we talk about the zone of learning being the discomfort zone, somewhere that's not the safety zone, a comfort zone, and it's not the panic and alarm zone, but it's that kind of like little nerves on edge is where we can really learn. And he makes that reference here that the community practice helped him to be okay with being in that discomfort zone. We also talk about the journey of anything that's worthwhile doing. I draw this thing on the board where you have a peak here and you have a peak here, and in the way down here is the pits of despair, and maybe you don't get all the way down there because there's a little bridge that has to do with family and friends. But anyway, it's showing that dip is not unusual. And so this person referenced that when she said I had reached that point where I might have gone into the pits of despair because trumpet wasn't fun anymore, and that her community of practice was helpful and shared their experience about learning instruments, and that really helped her to keep going. And this one is, just talking about how this helps her pay attention to something that's really important to her, which is art, and how it can so easily get crowded out during all the busyness of being a student. So I think that's all I want to say, and I'm going to quit sharing my screen now so that I can actually see people's faces. I welcome comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Annalisa. And let's have, Susan has her hand up straight away. So Susan, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, Annalisa. It's nice to meet you, and a great presentation. And I'll echo Seamus too. I loved seeing the fall leaves. You know, I'm in Florida, and so we have either green or green, you know, so it was very nice seeing the pictures.
I'm familiar with those colors as well.
I'm familiar with the English, you know, no colors in the winter. So I really appreciate this warm weather. But anyway, I initiate self-directed learning in my classes. I teach leadership within the community. And just like you mentioned, often students will sort of look like deer in the headlights, you know, when we say, oh, you know, you can plan your learning and evaluate your learning. And the evaluation is usually the hardest part for them. And, you know, how do they know when they're actually reaching some of their goals? And so I just wondered, I love your idea of the social journaling, and I'm going to adopt that. But I wondered if you had any other ideas of how they can measure their progress along the way. You know, how do you get them to do that? Because that's always the difficult bit for us.
Mm. Well, I do have them, because they've already got the habit of doing a learning partner agreement, because of working that out with their adult learner, then I have them do that for themselves when they're writing their proposal of an idea for self-directed learning. It's like, okay, so just like you and your adult learning partner figure out, well, how will I know if I meet that goal, you know? And I do it as sort of a formula that the goal is like, I want to do this so that I can that, and I will know that I'm succeeded if this happens, you know? So they are very individualistic. But then when it comes to like ideas about, all right, I've got my indicators and I can do that, but how do I really assess this experience? And so then we as a class will brainstorm some criteria. What's going to be meaningful to you? And so we make these banks of criteria that have to do with the outcomes, the products, and some that have to do with the processes. And then they can choose from which ones really resonate with them. So if they want to rig it, that's fine. You know, it's just like you really have to think through, okay, process and product, and what of this do I care about? And it's sort of like choose your own adventure. It's choose your own assessment from stuff that we generate together.
Right. Do you ever use learning contracts with them?
Well, I don't use learning contracts per se. I think of learning partner agreements as more kind of relational and friendly, and here's what we aspire to do. And for me, learning contracts feel a little like a burden.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
A little more formal as well. Yes, I understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
I suppose it depends on how you envisage them. Many years ago, back in the last millennium, when I was a youth and community worker, we had an in-service training project, and one of the things we did was we used to say renew the contract, but it became quite a sociable thing, because we would shake hands or give the person a hug or something like that and say we're renewing our contract to learn together. So I suppose you can. It depends, I suppose, how you frame the thing, and maybe it's different with adult learners too than maybe undergraduates as well, because they see the world certainly in a different way. So yeah. Okay, but that's really interesting. Anybody else like to make any comment?
Well, Christine says that she can't talk because she's on the train right now. Any experience in these COPs on sustainability? Yes, I have used this in my class that's on lifelong learning, just sustainability. And I'm calling them learning ecosystems because I'm in the rural area. And if I say learning cities here, nobody's going to sign up for that class. But I think of it as learning ecosystems, learning localities, learning whatever's, you know.
Aren't cities collections of villages anyway?
There you go. Well, maybe in Europe they are. They're too spread out here. Anyway, yes. So I have used them. Communities of practice with the class that's more focused on sustainability, and those tend to like fall out around people that want to do recycling projects, or people that are more interested in process, or people that want to see if there's some research that needs doing that would be helpful. So yes, similar kinds of benefits in those groups. But that group also has, in addition to individual projects and mentoring an adult, that also has class projects. So that I would say in those cases, the community of practice is less important, or less a big chunk proportionally, because we're also doing projects together in communities.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else like to make any comments?
I've got another one if no one else is.
Okay.
So we use the Canvas learning platform here. And so I have a couple of community of practices that I'm really trying to build, really. And so one is I supervise a master's and doctoral program. So I put all the students in this community of practice because they're online for the most part. And so it's a way for them to talk with one another online about what they're doing, because they're all in different classes. So some of them meet in the classes, but this was really, I wanted them to have like a community sort of social and support as well. And then I have another one that I've just started. I'm leading a study group to London next year, hopefully. And that's another community of practice. But my question is really, do you have like an online platform where you also have a place where all your students can go and talk online? And what is it?
Well, we use Canvas also for our learning management system, but like I said, I let the communities of practice choose whatever platform works for them. I personally hate Slack. Some of them like Slack, but some of them use WhatsApp or something like that.
Yeah.
And right now, I feel like they need that space that I don't go to, just because life is stressful, particularly right now. And I really find that if I go to places that they're in, that they don't take enough ownership, that they're still looking for cues from me. So I don't have a place where I know what all they're talking about. And, you know, part of it is my philosophy that we're all adult learners here. You know, I'm not your mom, and I want to be a compassionate fellow human being, but I'm trying to break you of the habit of looking to me for your learning, even though I'm doing a whole lot of work designing and facilitating the structure and the conditions so that you can do that.
Yeah, I do feel like the mom sometimes, you know, the mother duck leading all the ducklings, and that's hard to sort of step away sometimes.
Yes, not easy. No, this is really, really interesting. Any other comments from anybody else? Yeah, Carmen.
I just wonder if I can make a question, which is, well, related, but it's not about the students. And I was just wondering if your experience, have you ever tried to build a community of practice with colleagues? And because the dynamics are a bit different. You are not the boss anymore. You are a colleague as well. And then if you have tried and you have succeeded steering things, how do you encourage participation, and how do you encourage engagement? That was my question.
Well, in the Pascal Faith and Practice Learning Community Group that I'm in, Learning Community of Practice that I'm in, it didn't start out saying, hey, we're going to be a community of practice. And in fact, I had that insight fairly recently and talked about it at our last meeting that, hey guys, this is what we are, you know. We started out because we had this common interest in, we're not anti-data people or anything like that. I don't want to give that impression, but we were like, just like Donella Meadows said, I wish I had put in this stuff about visioning and love and learning 30 years ago, but I didn't. We're interested in a similar way about the role of spirituality and faith in creating learning communities or learning regions or learning whatever, you know. So we just started with that common interest, and then we were giving ourselves assignments like, okay, so we're in COVID now, and I remember doing one where it's like, what is COVID teaching you? What have you lost during COVID? What have you gained during COVID? What do you want to hold on to after COVID? What do you want to get rid of? You know, just those kind of designs when we were thinking about just not only our personal experiences, but how we're relating to communities now. And so that sort of thing we just took turns doing. We would just like sign up in advance. So we have our fearless leaders of Maria Lou Wong and Margaret Sutherland are our co-conveners or whatever. So within that, them saying that at least at a minimum, we'll send out doodle polls and get meetings scheduled, but also just kind of be the shepherds. We just, you know, make up what our program is based on what's happening in our lives and our practice.
We had some experience of a work-based community practice, Karma, last year when COVID hit. The country was given 6 hours to shut down, basically. In fact, our Taoiseach Prime Minister was in the US when he announced that Ireland was shutting down. He wasn't even at home. This will tell you how quickly it came upon us. So within 6 hours, we had to move our entire program online. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of learning and cross-pollination of ideas among the group. So what we did, we decided to establish a community of learning, community of practice, so that people could share their practice, because everybody was learning together, and we were all, I suppose, in the same emergency and dealing with it, and that worked out extremely well. We called on some outside people from time to time, where we said, oh, we need to know more about, and then we got people in to talk about the things we didn't know about and so on and so forth. But so much of the learning was within the group, and you know, all kinds of people contributed to that within the group, and I think it was really successful. And in the university, the rest of the university took a different view of things, and they were working through scenario A, scenario B, scenario C, scenario. I think they were onto the second round of the letters with all the various scenarios. They were
alpha, beta, gamma now.
trying to all the potentials, but we kept it pretty tight, and we said we're going with scenario A. Let's figure out how scenario A is going to work for us. And what we discovered when our community practice was up and running, other people in other parts of the university wanted to join, and we let them join. So that was an interesting process for sure.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
thank you.
That's a good idea. You know, that maybe we should collect some stories of COVID community of practices. That seriously, Seamus, maybe for the
yeah, no, absolutely. You know, because so much was learned obviously in this time, and there's so much that is important for people in the future as well, in terms of resilience and how to deal with resilience and so on. Carmel, you're ready to go?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to thank you also for the presentation, and I'm so much inspired because of this community of practice. But regarding our sessions last week, the professionalization of adult educators and also the cooperation with universities and adult educators, I think this would be a wonderful chance to encourage adult educators and to establish such practice groups within the framework of universities. I mean, in university lifelong learning, and then to engage them in such in professional discussions and so on. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Carmen. We have some inner life of teaching groups here, you know, based on Parker Palmer's circle of trust method. And I find those, for me, a lot of people find those really nice, just to have a space to talk about being a person, you know, as a professor or a staff member. But I find that still too much directed at or led by a facilitator and a leader. And for me, what's been really helpful in the community practice that I'm in is that it does feel organic, and it does feel very much like we share responsibility for it, and it doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like, oh, right, here's a little boost, you know, here's a time to think about things that are intellectually interesting and to do it as a full human being. And then I kind of get that sense from my students too, that they really like that I'm not looking over their shoulder. You know, like I'll say, I want to see your whatever learning partnership agreement you all work out amongst yourselves. And I want to see what you're thinking in terms of how you're assessing, but I don't take part in their exchange. Oh, am I running out of time? Sorry, don't mean to.
Yeah, we're running close to the clock now. So I suppose we just wind up. Any final comments? And then I think Karma might want to just do a very quick reminder for tomorrow and what's happening tomorrow.
Yes, very, very quickly. It's only to remind those who were not here yesterday, for example, that tomorrow we have a panel. And I understand that the presenters from this week will participate in this panel. And we will also have Xavier Prats-Monet as a guest. And Seamus will lead be the moderator tomorrow.
Conductor of the orchestra.
Yes, you will be the boss. And the title of the discussion panel is Learning to Shape a New World. And I hope that you all join us and you enjoy the discussion, and then you also are active and participate in the discussion that will open to all the attendees. So that was all I wanted to say.
Okay. Thanks very much, Karma. And I suppose we should wind up by just thanking you, Annalisa, very much for this very inspiring contribution. It certainly is what we needed, I think, at this stage of the week, in terms of considering, you know, how we go forward and how we shape the world. And we're talking about that as well tomorrow, because I think it's important for us to be able to think and operate in new and different ways. And I think your presentation has certainly given us an opportunity to think outside of the box, to use that phrase, which is over.
Because we're all in our little boxes on Zoom, right?
Yeah. Exactly. We're in our little boxes here on some kind of a crate. We're like, you know, you see them sometimes, these chickens being transported. We're all in our little cages on the back of the truck looking out. So thank you very much, Annalisa. And I know you're going to be a little bit restricted on time tomorrow, but so maybe we can put you in near the start so that you get a chance to contribute and say things before you have to fly off. And thanks, everybody.
I don't have to prepare anything for tomorrow, do I?
No, I think
okay.
No. I think what we try to do tomorrow is try to bring ideas from the earlier presentations and maybe start thinking prospectively as well in terms of, you know, where we might go from here.
Thank you all.
Okay, take
Everybody
care.
have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.